I think as humans have a tendency to kind of accept the conditions that others want to thrust upon us. Those could be salary ranges, they could be collection terms, invoicing terms. And as I'm listening to you talk, I'm thinking to myself, I have continued to try and say, not only to people I represent in professional development as individuals or teams at companies, but I would say it to a founder, I would say it to any entrepreneur. You dictate your terms.
Okay, Mark, welcome to Outsource to Profits. Do you mind telling the audience a little bit about yourself, your company, what you do, and how you solve problems for people?
Yeah, Jamie, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. To try to bridge that answer, I've spent my entire life professionally, so 30, 35 years in the information technology staffing space. And for the vast majority of that, I was an owner operator. And so I built and sold a couple of those companies. So I've been in the business of helping people improve professionally, I guess, if you threw an umbrella over the whole thing. Subset of that being helping specific people find specific jobs, bettering their professional circumstances, and then training people in a sales and recruiting capacity to assist those people as I scaled those two businesses.
This is fantastic. And we're going to focus today, and focus is the key word, and talk about specialization and its compounding effect that it has on your career and opportunities. And I'm going to tell it through a story. So when I started my sales career, I lived in Australia, did my master's degree. Before that, I was working in financial services, working at a bank. Didn't like it, did my master's degree, came to Toronto, was in commercial real estate. Then I was at a software company selling to grocery retailers. Then I was at a software company selling to investment banks, private equity firms, and financial institutions. And then I decided to start my own sales consultancy. So not until the age of 30. I want you to picture if LinkedIn had have existed back then, all the different ideal customer profiles in 2-year stints that I would try to build up a network, then I would collapse that network and I'd start all over again. I'd build up a network and I'd collapse that network. And this kept going on. And now from the age of 30 to 46, I focused in on one buyer persona. Yes, sometimes it's large global enterprise companies versus SMB, but it's been around the founder and the chief revenue officer. And what I implore younger entrepreneurs, younger sales professionals is to understand every year you spend in a market, you are compounding your knowledge and your social network. So, Mark, first question is, what are you seeing and why? What are you seeing gone wrong and why in the recruitment space you are seeing people try to peanut butter spread themselves? Their resumes are going everywhere. They're tacking from vertical to vertical. They're changing up their tech skills so much. How is it hurting them from the perspective that you're seeing on the guy who's placing people into companies?
Yeah, so if I were to talk about the recruiting component of that, specializing as a recruiter and in the recruiting business, Jamie, you may know this, but you can have a full desk where the recruiter and the sales rep, the candidate liaison and the client liaison are the same person. And then you have in a more of a consulting business, the candidate liaison is specifically a candidate liaison and they source people. And then the client liaison is a sales rep and they interface with the customer. So the exchange is internally between the recruiter and the sales rep in that regard. And in my experience, I've gone into companies where I've been asked to help them turn things around, and I've started my own company, two very, very different circumstances. And it just seems to be that if you take the approach of niching and being specific, and whether that's a geography, a technology, an industry, an income level, whatever, it requires a diligent amount of work. It requires a longer term relationship based investment of time and energy. It requires more work. And I think that generally speaking, most people are attracted to, coerced into, convinced of this idea that if I'm everything to everyone, then it just becomes a volume play. And eventually I'll get lucky with the numbers and I'll start to put some transactions in place. And that was the case in the 80s, and it's still the case today. So I probably would need a psychologist to understand why that is, but that's my kind of first pass at your question.
Uh, I have two great friends that when they were 25, they actually started in sales, inside sales at the same organization. We all went to the same undergrad. We all did our masters together, and they started moving down a track. This is real. It's not like some thesis. And over the course of 20 years, one decided to move in and out of multiple sales organizations. And the ideal customer profile that they sold into actually changed with every one of those changes. And the other actually quickly found a niche within the organization around the technical side of sales, also known as a sales engineer, that led down a path of more commercial productization, led to a path of corporate development, led to mergers and acquisitions, and ultimately has now been the head of M&A and a C-suite executive at 3 different organizations. So over a 20-year period, yes, account executives at sales organizations can make really great money if you're very successful. But imagine this fork in a road that started within a few years and starts to separate so vastly that 20 years later, one is the head, a C-suite executive in publicly traded companies, and the other is a continued sales professional. And that is one of those use cases. But tell the audience about stories from the road where you've actually seen people, like-minded people over long periods of time, like the ill effects of not specializing versus the success story of those that became the expert of this thing, and that thing over 10 or 20 years, what it did for them.
Yeah, well, I have a perfect use case. I mean, I started off with a guy that became a very good friend of mine, and we were both doing this job in the Boston area. And if you know anything about Boston, it's a hotbed of technology. It always has been. So you can literally cover a geography that's maybe 10 square miles and build a multi-million-dollar business in 10 square miles. For long story short, for personal reasons, I left Boston after about 3.5 years of specializing in something within the 128 belt of Boston. And my friend has stayed there and has worked in the same market for probably 30 plus years now. I wouldn't say he's done the same exact thing, but he stayed in technology in Boston. And I went to Florida. And I had some good success, but what you're alluding to, what you're talking about in my mind, Jamie, is what I've had to do is essentially start over multiple times. And I didn't have the prescience, I suppose, as a 20-year-old, and maybe none of us do, to foresee what staying in the same place, doing the same thing over a long period of time might have brought to me in terms of success. And I'm not complaining. I've had some significant success, but he has deep relationships in very, very high places at some significant organizations in Boston. And he can pick up the phone and get what he needs anytime he wants. And I need to look up how to find an electrician in Florida every once in a while because I don't have any family here or friends here, So, I mean, we could talk about this for hours on end, I'm sure. But, I had a guy come in and consult with one of my businesses years ago. And the one thing, he did 2 things. I paid him $10,000 a month. It's the first time I've ever paid anybody that amount of money that wasn't selling for me. And it was an interesting dilemma in my head. He came in, he looked at our stuff for a while, and he talked to me for a couple months and said, you need to do 2 things. You need a formalized, educated CPA accountant in-house. You need to produce financial reports Most importantly, cash flow, because you're great at generating revenue, but you don't know where any of your money is, when it's coming in, from whom, whatever. And it was during a recession. The other thing he said was stop trying to be everything to everyone. Pick one thing. And in a matter of months, as soon as you do that and you get over this pain that you're going to feel from leaving all this business on the table, and stop cherry picking everything and just go after one thing. And he turned the company around with those two pieces of advice, and we flourished, ended up selling the thing for millions of dollars. And then interspersed in that story, there's a lot of personal things and family things that, you know, that move the ball for things that had nothing to do with business acumen or business decisions. But I'll never forget that. And it's something that I have tried to continue to practice over the years. And now I'm specialized again. But yeah, my buddy, he's exactly what you're talking about. You know, he stayed in Boston and stayed in technology, and I left, and I've been in probably 6, 7 different markets since then.
Yeah, I'm part of a networking group called Collective 54, and Collective 54 is for founders of professional services companies. So it's a specialization. You have to be an owner of a ProServe to be part of this collective. And I've been part of it for years, and I've seen successes and failures of agencies, and two things that I've often noted. One is I'm on agency 3, and I've continued to sell to the same ideal customer profile, and it served me so well. I'm at 26,000 LinkedIn connections that I can recycle these relationships over and over again. I had a call today with a prospect from my first agency it was the third customer ever in 2013. So 11 years later. So problem number one that I often see, and let's use the industry that I'm talking about, professional services. People will be involved in one industry. Let's say they sold into HR, then they'll sell into operations, then they'll sell into finance. That's problem one. And then problem two, to the point that you just made, they will try to appease everybody by having this massive basket of services, many times that don't overlace or interconnect. And it's not very productized. And what that forces is actually a bad commercial engine. That bad commercial engine, I've had them before. And what I mean by that is you allow your customers to pay in a variety of different ways. So some customers are on a fixed fee bid. They pay a one-time fee annualized. The next customer pays you on a monthly retainer. The next customer is pay per performance. The next customer is, and you all of a sudden, your working capital constraints as you grow, if you can even grow, because your model is flip flopping so much that people can't keep up to be able to scale this thing. But you run into these massive workflow or working capital constraints because you start to have accounts receivable problems known as day sales outstanding, because you've got money that's coming in these dispirited ways, and it's not predictable. And it's because you allowed a hodgepodge of services rather than, some of the best services companies I've ever seen, like Design Pickle years ago. You pay only by credit card. We only do this one thing. We edit videos as an example. And while they're giving what appears that they're giving up on other services, they just cookie cut all day long. Pay credit card, do thing. Pay credit card, do thing. And it became worth 8 figures. So as we kind of wrap up, what are a word of wisdom coming back onto the theme of being specific and being intentional and making sure that you are creating something that's hyper-focused? As you're somebody that sees it from the customer side, employing people, and those getting employed, what would be kind of some of your final thoughts on, hey, I'm looking back on my career and I'm around the career of thousands of people. Mm-hmm. Don't make these mistakes.
Yeah, I think number one is we I think as humans have a tendency to kind of accept the conditions that others want to thrust upon us. Those could be salary ranges, they could be collection terms, invoicing terms. And as I'm listening to you talk, I'm thinking to myself, I have continued to try and say, not only to people I represent in professional development as individuals or teams at companies, but I would say it to a founder, I would say it to any entrepreneur. You dictate your terms, right? And I've earned the right to do that because I've become very good at what I do, and I don't feel guilty about that. But it's like, I remember the first time somebody said, well, we have 90-day payment terms and you have to invoice us monthly. And I said, well, I'm not going to see any money for 120 days then. I'm not a math guy, but my terms are, I'm going to invoice you weekly and you're going to pay me upon receipt. And then I would go out. And if people didn't want to do that, I would walk away because that was such an important parameter for me. It was a make or break parameter for me. And then I could turn around if I was paying consultants, and I could pay my consultants every 2 weeks. So there's no float there. I'm going to collect my money before I have to pay out my payroll. You know, you don't have to be a finance expert to see the value in that. So I think but that's just payment terms. But I would,
and I call these first principles, by the way. And I'm in agency 3, and I've been developing this list that one day in my 60s and 70s, maybe I'll write a book about it. But these are the collection of, if you don't kind of carve them in stone and they become your way, to your point, your way of dictating, others will dictate for you, and you'll concede, and then you will break, and then the whole machine will unravel.
Yep.
And my company, Get Leverage, will only collect by credit card, and it must be paid on the first of every month or your service is cut off. And I've grown it, a business, to 7 figures on a $10,000 credit card to start the business through customer cash flow.
Yeah, you know, the irony of that is that we think that we're imposing our will on others, but what we're doing is we're demanding the respect, and the people will give you that. When you can come in a position of authority and say, you can get this, you can get something like this from someone else, but you can only get this from me. Then dictate is probably the wrong word. That's probably too strong. Impose is probably the wrong word, but this is how we're going to structure the deal. And this is why we're going to structure it this way. It's better for you. It's better for me. And over time, I think collectively we'll both understand as we see that kind of fall out before our eyes. But yeah, don't accept that when someone says to you, this is how we have to do this because it's always the way it's been done. That completely turns me the other way. It's like, no, the opposite of that, you know? So yeah. That's you and I see eye to eye on that one.
How do people get a hold of you? What are the best ways to, and what does your ideal customer profile look like to have a conversation with you?
Yeah, it's a great question that I've been sharpening that blade for a long time. Right now, I have 2 ways of serving people. One is I offer leadership training to small groups in corporate environments, and I like to limit those groups to about 10 people at a time because I think the impact is much more impactful, not to be redundant, and sustainable, more importantly, over time. And that's pure leadership. Aspiring leaders, people that someone might have in their organization where like, this kid's going to be a leader in a couple of years and I want you to train him up. And then there's an individual component where you can get on my calendar and I do one-on-one. That group of people is professional men who would consider themselves probably good at what they do and want to get much better at what they do. And it seems to be a group of men that's in the area of about 45 to 55. It's a midlife transitional place. And a lot of these men are content, but they want to get another gear. Their performance, they want to leave a legacy, perhaps. They want to get more out of what they're doing, more out of life, concentrated in their professional progress, which also involves some leadership training as well. And to get on my calendar, you just got to go to my website, you know, and it's above the fold. Just hop on. I give a 30-minute call. And during that 30 minutes, I'll tell you if I can help you based on asking you a bunch of questions, and then how I can help you. And if I can't help you, I'll tell you that too. So we both get to qualify whether we'll work together after that call.
This has been amazing. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, Jamie. Appreciate it.
Thank you.